It's Wednesday, April 19th. I'm at the West End Gun Club, and I'm just here trying to re-zero this spur mount that I installed on this Remington 700. And the reason why I put the spur mount on here is because I swapped out for taller rings. Basically, I was running 1-inch Seekins rings, and I found that I was pushing too much pressure on the stock, trying to get my head down on the gun in order to see through the scope. And so it was causing me to affect the gun during recoil, so I wasn't getting good follow through. So I went with taller rings, which these are 1.5 inch. And so instead of getting a new set of Seekins rings, I decided to get a spur mount because I wanted to try a spur mount. So that's where we stand right now. The gun is pretty much on. I fired a few rounds before this, and it was only with the half an inch difference in height, I had to come down 1.5 mils to get it back to a elevation 0 at 100. So earlier when I got here, I was the first one here, but then another guy came into the range, and he wanted to set up his chrono, but he had to wait for me simply because he was using an optical chronograph, or he is using an optical chronograph, and I was already shooting, and he needed to go out to adjust and set up his chrono. And that's why, one of the reasons why I stopped using an optical chronograph, because it's just a pain in the ass to set up if you're on a shared firing line, as opposed to a lab radar where you just set it up on the bench, or if you're using a magneto speed, you hook up directly to your barrel. You don't have to disrupt range operations to do so. But just to mention the spur mount, which is the reason why I'm out here, it's a pretty solid single piece mount. It's got a built-in level. I'm gonna do a little bit more of a write-up on it on my blog, but there's already plenty out there on this specific mount written by other people since it's been out for a long time. I went with a 0 mil 34 millimeter, it's 34 millimeter rings, 0 minute cant, since I have a 20-minute base anyway, and then it's 1.5 inches high. So as I mentioned earlier, my Seekins rings were 1 inch high, which put my scope center and my bore center 2 inches apart. So that extra half inch with 1.5 now gets me 2.5 inches above the barrel bore line. And so a lot of people make a big effort to get the scope as close to the barrel as possible, which is an old school methodology with traditional stocks. The problem with chassis systems today is that if you run the lowest possible scope rings to get that scope close to the barrel, you run the risk of not having enough room on your stock for your proper sight picture due to cheek weld, because you might not have enough adjustments down. I had to take out the spacer here when I was running the 1 inch rings, and even then it was still just barely low enough on the comb for me to shoot on that scope with 1 inch rings. So when I put the 1.5s on there, I could actually use the spacer still, and I still have just enough room for my face to ride not too tight on the comb. So everything works out well this way, so that's why I recommend running a 1.5 inch tall scope ring set for any chassis style system. It's just better that way. And a lot of people, the reason why they want to run the scope as close to the bore line as possible is to get elevation for long range. And that might be an issue with older scopes, but today's scopes, where we have a lot of elevation built into the turrets, it's not a big deal anymore. And when I ran the numbers, the difference between 2 inch scope height and a 2.5 inch scope height from bore line center, was only 0.2 of a mil roughly. So I lost 0.2 of a mil of elevation when it comes down to it, which isn't too bad, all things considering you got a lot of elevation built in these scope turrets, as long as you get a decent scope. One little thing I want to mention is the wedge. So I didn't bring it with me, but there's a wedge that goes and fits between this slot, and it's supposed to run along the flat side of the scope bottom, and it allows you to level the scope with respect to the base, since the base has, the scope base or the pen mount has a level in it. The problem is with these turrets, the knurl links on this Vortex Razor HD Gen 2, the wedge hits these knurl links, so you can't use the wedge. So I could have technically filed down the wedge to let me use it, or just cut out the wedge so it lets me use it with this scope. But I think that's something that Sphur needs to fix with regards to using their wedge with these other scopes out there with these huge adjustment knobs. Granted, not all scopes have a side parallax adjustment like this Razor HD Gen 2, but it is an issue that needs to be worked out by Sphur. So when I fired the first round, I was aiming for here, shot 1.5 high, came down about 1.5, 1.6 mils, and I was pretty much dead on. I think I dialed it down to 1/10 of a mil just to get it kind of low in this ring here, simply because we're at a higher elevation here at West End Gun Club compared to sea level. So I want my 100-yard zero to kind of be a little bit higher when we get to sea level. Two, when the barrel heats up, it tends to drift higher anyway, about a mil. So I just wanted to be on the lower half here. And I shot a couple rounds to get it kind of lower in here. These were drifting high. I think a lot of this was my bag riding. So these are my first shots here, just testing those. So generally I think we're okay as far as the Sphur mount is concerned. This was a little wild here. But the first rounds out of the gun, first rounds of the day, are usually the best for me. And I tend to just fall apart later on. But those are pretty tight, so. So yeah, it didn't take me that long to get the Sphur mount re-zeroed. It technically only took me 4 rounds. And I'm pretty good as far as the new rings are concerned. The other reason why I came out this morning to the range is to test out this new Glock trigger that I put on my Glock 17 Gen 3. It, as you can see here, it has the new CMC trigger for the Glocks. They're out for the 9mm Glock frames. It's a flat face trigger, and what's really cool about it though is the short reset. It resets very quickly, and the take up on that trigger after the reset is very quick. There's very little bowing or flex there, and very little creep. What I noticed in the very first pull, so if you pull straight from rest, it's a very long pre-travel. It's very long. It's longer than most Glock triggers. But once you get to that first stop there, when it starts to engage the firing pin safety plunger, you've got a little bit of take, and then you'll feel it, and then it'll creep through just a tad, and then it'll break. Then when you let it reset, let go just a bit, trigger resets, pull. There's no creep whatsoever between the reset and then the break. Little to none, which is amazing. It's got a short over travel, so that I think that's why that reset is able to happen so quickly. But anyway, let's try that out today, or this morning rather. So my initial impressions of the CMC trigger, fairly positive. The one thing I've noticed it does, that hook on the bottom of that trigger does leave a little bit of a hard impact on your pad of your index finger. So that might be something you're gonna have to get used to, and how you pad the gun with your trigger finger. For some reason, I do have the tendency to push up with this trigger. For some reason, my second shot floats up. Not sure why. We'll figure that out. I've only shot about 60 rounds. I'm about 100 rounds of 9mm today because I can't shoot very long. I got to get out of here in a few minutes. I do like that reset though. It is really good as far as if you want to prep that trigger compared to this skimmer trigger that I have in this Gen 319, G19. What the skimmer trigger has in most of the aftermarket Glock triggers that we've seen so far before this CMC trigger is you get a very short pre-travel before you hit that wall. And then you get a little bit of a creep and then a long reset after that fact. So there's a longer reset on these, really long actually, and then you got the break. I think that I prefer the CMC's long over-travel, long pre-travel, short over-travel versus the short pre-travel, long over-travel of these skimmer triggers and these other triggers that are out there if you use like a ghost connector or whatnot. Because that long over-travel is what causes most people to come off target and miss shots based on how their trigger pull affects that gun during follow-through. Granted, the bullet should have left the barrel by that time that your over travel comes into effect, but considering how fast some people pull the trigger, that actually does have some impact as far as affecting your shots in terms of the over travel and what happens to the gun after you pull that trigger, right when it breaks, what that over travel does to your mechanics at that point. So I really do like this CMC trigger. I just have to get used to this little hook on the bottom end of this flat face. Other than that, like my ability to hold the gun straight and my sights on target with this trigger is really good because of that short over travel. The short over travel, I've noticed that my sights stay perfectly on target with that trigger pull. I don't drift, and I've noticed with every Glock trigger that I've used, if I shoot one-handed, I know for a fact that my gun, my sights are drifting to the right, my front sight drifts to the right, it jerks. Just because that over travel causes my hand to sort of shimmy to the right, just so slightly. So that's what I have noticed with this specific trigger, the CMC trigger, as far as improvements to my my follow through. So CMC triggers, I had a preview of it on my SHOT Show after action report. I'm going to try to do a write-up of this trigger shortly. There's not much I can say about the trigger in a review, but because I'm not really a professional IPSEC shooter, I don't shoot IPSEC or IDPA or any of that stuff. Just more of my enthusiasm for shooting pistols. But give you my take on it. But right now, just beforehand, this trigger does it's really good. It's a lot different than most of the other triggers you're going to find out there that have already come out before this, like the skimmers. I'm trying to come up with their names out there. Zevtech, their triggers. So I think you will like this one much better if you were tried out the CMC trigger. CMCtriggers.com. They're out of Texas. I believe this trigger was 180, which is kind of high, but most aftermarket Glock triggers are in that range. I'm probably going to get another one for my G19, my Gen 3 G19. We'll see how that goes. And assuming this trigger is reliable and it's safe, I might put one in my Gen 4 Glock 26. Because my Glock 26 trigger I'm not happy with, even though I put a skimmer in there. It still does not break the way I want it to. It's still got a heavy pull. And I'm not liking that trigger in that gun. But let me finish up the rest of my rounds in these, out of the 100 I have left, so I got about 40 left. Shoot those rounds, and we'll call it a morning. Just a quick mention of the holster that I'm using today. Some of you might notice that I'm not using my Raven concealment holster. I couldn't find my G17 Raven concealment holster last night for some reason. I think I put it somewhere in the garage or something and I can't find it. So I dug out this G-Cold drop leg holster that I actually had for several months. I've never used. It was sitting in the wrapper or the bag, and it was in a cabinet. So since that was the only holster I could find, I brought it with me today. And it actually works pretty well. And the reason why I bought this G-Cold drop leg holster is because I wanted a holster that could clear a plate carrier. The problem with the Raven concealment, and you've probably seen some photos I may have online or whatever, is that the Raven concealment holster, it's nice and tight to the hip. But the problem is when you have that plate carrier, there's a lot of interference there. And so sometimes you'll have to like move the cummerbund underneath the holster, like between the holster and your body, to make sure it doesn't get caught up. And there is the tendency for the gun, depending on how you move your body, that it could rub against the side of that plate carrier and you might have movement issues. So I just wanted a drop leg holster for those scenarios in the event that I was wearing a plate carrier and I needed a holster to use. And so this provides me that clearance so it doesn't interfere with that plate carrier, and it's still high enough where I can get to it quickly and it's not an issue. I actually do want it a little higher on my leg. I didn't really do too much adjustments on this. It's simply because there really isn't any on this specific strap here, on the drop leg from the paddle clip to the actual holster body per se. Not sure why you don't really have any strap adjustments, but it doesn't really exist there. So I kind of want it a little bit higher, but it's not too bad here. As long as it's not really low on the leg, which you don't want it because it just adds too much like bulk there, and it adds that weird inertia or that centrifugal force when you're moving your leg. So it's nice to have it high on the leg thigh as possible, so that when you're moving around, it's not adding that weight to the lower part of your knee and it's not feeling bulky. So this is good as is, but it could be better if I can get a little higher on the body. But other than that, it draws easily, and I can reholster easily without too many issues. I like it. So that's a G-Code holster, a drop leg holster. It's got a paddle clip, and it's got their mechanism where you can take the holster off the drop leg, I guess, body per se. I guess it's called the body or the plate. I could take the holster off of that if I need to. And you can replace it with a different holster because this is Kydex. So if you had another gun you wanted to use on the drop leg, you can swap out different holster Kydexes and put it on that plate adapter here. So anyway, it's just past 7:30 on this Wednesday, April 19th. I'm done for the day. I finished on the main line. I put out 25 rounds downrange just to get my Sphur mount situated and re-zeroed on that scope. I came out here to test out this CMC Glock 17 trigger, which I can recommend right now as far as Glock triggers are concerned. I do like it. And that's pretty much it. Got to get home, swap out all my gear, and then head to the office because I got meetings in the morning. I'll probably go to the range, Pendleton, on the 29th, I think. That's Saturday. It's a 3x600 that I'm going to go and shoot in just to get some, probably want to re-verify my Remington 700 zero at 600 yards. But I anticipate it should be following the line with the same trajectory. It's just going to be offset by 0.2 of a mil. I ran the numbers this morning using the Vortex Optics ballistic calculator they have online. It's free to use. You should check it out. I'll link to that in the video description. It's really handy to have, and you can print out stuff. If you're like me and don't want to spend on those fancy ballistic calculators you can bring to the range or have an app or something, I just prefer to have it on paper. That's just me. So anyway, today is Wednesday, April 19th, just past 07:30. I'm at the West End Gun Club, about to leave. See you at the next vlog.
One more minute. Ready on the right.